The scream tore through the dim office like glass shattering in silence, and Emma felt her chest tighten as the weight of years pressed down. She had hidden herself too long, swallowed her words, and now the walls themselves seemed to accuse her. Emma whispered, "This is not who I am anymore," her voice trembling yet defiant. The clock ticked too loud, each second scraping against her nerves like knives. She remembered the countless times she was spoken over, her silence mistaken for weakness, and it burned her lungs. She pressed her hand against the desk, her reflection in the dark monitor staring back with accusing eyes. The storm outside raged in sync with her soul, lightning flashing across the glass and painting her face in pale blue. The world demanded her submission, but her heart demanded fire. In that moment, Emma's silence cracked like a breaking dam, and the first whisper of courage escaped into the storm. The morning after, the world carried on indifferent, yet Emma's silence lingered like a heavy cloak she could not shed. She stepped into the crowded subway, the air thick with chatter and mechanical screeches, but her mind replayed the night before. Strangers laughed, debated, argued in voices sharp and bold, and she wondered why hers always faltered. Emma thought, do they even know the cost of holding back? The train lurched forward, rattling her against the pole, her grip tightening as if to anchor herself. She remembered her childhood, where speaking up meant ridicule, her words drowned in louder echoes. Every station stop was a reminder that time pressed on, uncaring of her hesitation. Yet beneath her doubt, a spark pulsed, faint but undeniable. The memory of her whispered defiance still clung to her lips, like a secret she was not ready to let go. At work, the boardroom felt like a battlefield, voices colliding like swords while Emma sat at the edge of the table, unseen. Charts glowed on the projector, numbers dissected with confidence by others, yet her insights remained locked within her. Emma thought, I see more than they do, but my voice hides. Managers' booming laugh silenced smaller voices, the hierarchy carved deep into every sound. Her colleague David leaned back, arms crossed, watching her with quiet understanding, but offering no words. The walls of glass reflected her image again, a woman present yet invisible. She shifted in her chair, the wood groaning softly beneath her unease. The storm within her clashed with the order of the room, and she knew her silence was building chains heavier than steel. That night, Emma walked home through rain-slick streets, her heels splashing in shallow puddles, neon signs bending in reflection. The city pulsed around her, strangers brushing past with hurried steps and careless glances. Every voice she heard was louder, freer than her own. She remembered how her mother's voice once cut her down with simple words, "Don't make a scene," echoing until it became law. Emma whispered into the damp air, "I've made a prison out of obedience." The rain disguised her tears, but not the fire stirring beneath them. Streetlights flickered like hesitant resolve, urging her onward. In her silence, she carried a storm louder than the city's chaos, and though her body trembled, her steps grew steadier. Later, alone in her apartment, Emma stood by the window overlooking the city skyline. The storm had passed, leaving the streets below washed clean yet glistening. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her breath fogging the surface. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of distant traffic. Emma thought, if silence is survival, why does it feel like suffocation? She closed her eyes, remembering her whispered defiance, and it throbbed like a pulse of life in her chest. For the first time, she realized that her silence was not safety but surrender. She pulled back, straightening her spine, her reflection in the glass steadier than before. The city stretched out like an unanswered challenge, and though her voice was small, it was no longer absent. Emma entered her office early, the corridors still quiet, the fluorescent lights humming like restless thoughts. She laid her bag on the desk, staring at the unfinished reports that seemed to echo her own unfinished resolve. Her colleagues would soon arrive, their laughter filling the room with noise she struggled to match. Emma thought, I hear every voice but mine feels buried. The silence of the morning pressed on her, almost daring her to break it before the crowd arrived. She tapped her pen, her mind racing with the arguments she should have spoken yesterday. She pictured herself speaking up, but fear still drew the line across her lips. The desk clock ticked sharply, reminding her of time lost. She whispered, "One day I'll say it out loud." The empty office did not answer, but in her chest, the spark flickered. By midday, the office hummed with energy, the clash of voices bouncing off glass walls. Emma sat quietly while her team debated over deadlines, their words sharp as blades. She noticed how easily they cut one another, unafraid of judgment, while her own voice stayed hidden. Her colleague David glanced at her from across the table, his brow furrowing as if to say, "Why don't you speak?" Emma's fingers tightened on the edge of her chair, her silence screaming louder than any word she could offer. The conversation shifted to a project she had worked tirelessly on, yet another took credit without hesitation. Her chest ached, but she lowered her gaze instead of raising her voice. Emma thought, "Why do I allow myself to vanish?" The room roared with ideas while she sank into her invisible corner. The lunch break brought no relief, only more reminders of her distance. She sat at the cafeteria's edge, plastic tray untouched, while groups around her filled the air with laughter and chatter. Emma thought, "They belong, and I drift on the edges." She watched their gestures, their confidence woven so naturally into every word. David passed her table, pausing with his usual detached expression before sliding into a chair across from her. He said, "You'll choke if you keep swallowing your words." His bluntness pierced her armor, forcing a dry laugh from her lips. She replied, "And if I speak, maybe I'll drown." David shrugged, unimpressed, before returning to his silence. Yet his words echoed longer than any meal. Emma felt a sting in her chest, not from his sarcasm, but from knowing he was right. That evening, Emma visited her neighborhood park, hoping the open air might quiet her mind. Families gathered on benches, children's laughter piercing through the twilight air. She sat alone on a worn bench, her hands clasped tightly, watching the world move without her. Memories of her childhood rose uninvited, moments when her words were dismissed as foolish, shaping her silence into survival. Emma whispered, "I built walls when all I wanted was space." The park lights flickered on, casting a golden haze across the wet grass. She envied how others laughed so easily, voices free, carrying through the evening. A jogger passed, nodding briefly, but she could not summon a response. Instead, she sank deeper into her solitude, a quiet shadow beneath the lamps. Later that night, Emma sat at her kitchen table, bills and notes scattered in chaotic piles. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence as she traced the lines of overdue statements with a shaking finger. Emma thought, "I've survived in shadows, but shadows cannot pay what's owed." Her chest tightened with the weight of being overlooked, her work uncredited, her voice unused. She closed her eyes, hearing again the words David had spoken at lunch. His tone had been sharp, but the truth inside it stung deeper than sarcasm. She whispered, "Maybe he's right. Maybe silence is killing me." The room felt small, as if the walls had crept closer, but inside her chest a restless fire shifted. For the first time, she wondered if she had been punishing herself more than the world ever had. The boardroom felt like a storm, voices clashing louder than the thunder outside, each word like a blade cutting the air. Emma sat frozen, her report in front of her, filled with hours of effort, ignored by the louder ones. Her heart pounded as a colleague presented her ideas as his own, his confidence wrapping the room in false authority. She wanted to speak, to cut through his theft, but her throat tightened, sealing her voice away. David's eyes caught hers briefly, sharp and knowing, as if he saw her struggle. Emma thought, "This is the cost of silence, losing what is mine." The manager praised the presentation, claps echoing like nails into her chest. She clenched her fists under the table, the storm inside roaring against the quiet she forced upon herself. After the meeting, Emma walked briskly down the corridor, her heels striking sharp echoes that matched her heartbeat. David followed at a distance, his expression unreadable, until his voice cut the air. He said, If you keep letting them steal from you, don't cry when they own everything you've built." She stopped, shoulders rigid, anger and shame colliding within her. Emma replied, "You think it's that simple?" He smirked faintly, shaking his head. "It's not simple, it's survival." His words stung like salt in a wound, but his gaze carried a brutal honesty she could not deny. She turned away, her silence weighing heavier than before, but inside, something fragile cracked. She thought, survival isn't enough anymore. That night, Emma sat at her desk at home, lamplight pooling over the reports she had written. She flipped through pages where her thoughts were neatly arranged, yet spoken by another earlier. Her fingers traced the words like lost children, searching for their voice. She whispered, "Why can't I claim what is mine?" Outside, the storm had settled into drizzle, soft taps against the window soothing her restlessness. The apartment felt both sanctuary and cage, filled with silence that once comforted her but now burned. Emma's reflection in the window stared back with sharper eyes, a stranger demanding truth. She leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her body, but resolve sparking at her core. The silence she once wore as armor now felt like chains she had to break. The next day, Emma joined a team discussion in the open workspace, voices tumbling over each other in bursts of urgency. She hovered at the edge, her ideas ready, but her courage faltered as louder voices filled the void. A younger colleague dismissed her subtle suggestion without hesitation, laughter dismissing her as irrelevant. Emma's chest tightened, shame crawling over her skin like fire. David, watching from across the room, shook his head with a sardonic grin, almost daring her to fight back. She thought, even they see me as invisible. Her hands trembled as she gripped her chair, but the words still lodged like stones in her throat. The world moved on, leaving her behind once again, silence her unchosen companion. By evening, Emma walked through the city streets, neon lights painting her face in fractured colors. The crowd flowed around her, each voice louder than the next, drowning her thoughts in a tide of sound. She remembered David's words, cutting and merciless, replaying like a drum beat in her chest. She whispered, "Survival isn't living." The admission hung in the air, swallowed by the noise of traffic and chatter. She felt the weight of every moment she had been silent, every chance stolen by hesitation. Yet in the chaos of the streets, she sensed a pulse inside her, small, but undeniable. For the first time, the silence within her didn't feel protective. It felt like betrayal, and that betrayal hurt worse than any dismissal. Emma sat at her desk as the quarterly review unfolded, her stomach knotted as her manager praised another for work that had been hers. Each word sank like a stone, crushing the breath from her chest. She clenched her pen until her knuckles ached, but her voice refused to rise. David's glance pierced her across the room, unreadable yet sharp, as if demanding she break free. Emma thought, why do I keep giving away pieces of myself? The applause thundered around her, each clap hammering her silence deeper. She lowered her eyes, shame burning hot, but inside something fractured. The moment revealed not just betrayal from others, but her own surrender. For the first time, the weight of her silence felt unbearable, and her chest heaved under its crushing hold. By lunch, Emma escaped to the restroom, gripping the sink as cold water splashed her face. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, trembling lips betraying her storm. She whispered, "I'm erasing myself." The fluorescent lights hummed above like a cruel chorus of truth. Memories clawed through, childhood scoldings, dismissals, the endless cycle of obedience. Tears blurred her vision, sliding into the sink as her breath broke unevenly. She pressed her palms flat, her skin slick, her arms shaking. Emma thought, this silence is no shield, it's suffocation. For the first time, she did not hide from the truth in the mirror. Her voice cracked, frail but real. I cannot keep living like this. That evening, Emma walked home under gray clouds, the drizzle dampening her clothes as her steps slowed. The streets blurred into a haze, her chest heavy, each breath weighted with despair. She thought, everything I've endured feels wasted. A couple laughed nearby, their voices free, and she envied their ease. The lamplight flickered, reflecting on the wet pavement as she trudged past, shoulders hunched. Her phone buzzed, another reminder of unpaid bills, of a life barely held together. She leaned against a brick wall, pressing her forehead against the cold surface. For the first time, she whispered, "Maybe I am the problem." The words cut deeper than any insult from others. Emma collapsed into bed later, staring at the ceiling as shadows stretched across the room. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside, thunder cracking like the weight of years. She thought, "I've lived in silence so long I've forgotten who I am." Her body trembled under the blanket, as though even sleep refused her. The whispers of the past returned, her mother's sharp tone, her colleagues' dismissive laughter, echoes louder than thunder. Emma covered her ears, but nothing could mute them. Tears spilled onto her pillow as she whispered, "I don't know how to fight anymore." The darkness wrapped her tight, pressing into every corner of her mind, threatening to drown her resolve completely. The next morning, Emma walked into the office hollow-eyed, her body heavy yet rigid. The chatter of coworkers pierced her like knives, each laugh a reminder of her invisibility. She lowered herself into her chair, staring blankly at her monitor. David passed, pausing briefly, his voice low. "You're breaking apart." She did not answer, her lips pressed in tight surrender. Inside, her silence thundered with self-betrayal. Emma thought, "I'm disappearing." The realization was not subtle, it was suffocating. For the first time, her silence frightened her more than the risk of speaking ever had. Emma found an old folder buried in her drawer, filled with notes from her earliest projects. Her handwriting curved across the pages, bold and unafraid, unlike the silence she carried now. She thought, "I once believed in myself." Each page was evidence of her lost voice, ideas that had shaped campaigns, yet credited to others. Her hands shook as she realized her silence had not only stolen her future, but erased her past. A surge of anger burned, piercing through the numbness. She whispered, "I let them take everything." For the first time, her reflection in the window didn't look fragile, it looked furious. That night, Emma visited her childhood home, her mother's words echoing as she sat in the old living room. Memories returned of being silenced at the dinner table, mocked for speaking her mind. She touched the worn armrest, thinking, "This is where I learned silence." The realization struck like lightning, leaving her both shaken and strangely free. She whispered into the empty room, "It was never my voice that was wrong." The truth felt like a blade cutting chains. For the first time, her silence was not habit, it was choice, and she no longer wanted it. Back in her apartment, Emma spread her notes across the floor, building a wall of proof against her silence. She thought, "This is who I am, I built this." The words written years ago spoke louder than any voice in the room. David's blunt truth returned to her mind, now sounding less cruel and more necessary. She whispered, "I've been here all along." Her heart raced as she realized her silence had never been emptiness, it had been suppression. And now, suppression felt impossible. The moment was not gentle, it was a revelation sharp enough to bleed, and it demanded change. The next day, Emma entered the office with her papers in hand, no longer hidden in her drawer. Her heart pounded, but her steps were steady. The team gathered, already buzzing, but she cut into the air, her voice trembling yet firm. "This was my work." The room froze, every eye on her, disbelief flickering across faces. Her colleague's smirk faltered as David's lips curved into the faintest grin. Emma thought, "This is the moment." Her hands shook, but her words carried weight, undeniable. The silence in the room was no longer hers, it belonged to them. Later, alone in the corridor, Emma pressed her back against the wall, heart still racing from what she had done. She whispered, "I spoke." The words felt foreign yet powerful, like a key unlocking her chest. The world outside bustled on, but she had shifted. For the first time, she did not feel erased, she felt undeniable. The silence she once carried was gone, replaced by something raw and alive. Emma thought, "This is only the beginning." And though her body trembled, her spirit no longer bowed. The day of the presentation arrived, the conference room filled with chatter and expectation. Emma clutched her notes, palms slick, heart slamming in her chest. She thought, I cannot disappear again. Her name was not called, but she rose anyway, her voice breaking through the noise. I have something to say. Silence gripped the room like a held breath. Faces turned, some shocked, others amused, but none louder than the pounding in her ears. She stepped forward, trembling yet unyielding, and laid her work on the table. The pages spoke her truth before her words followed. This was mine. Her voice shook, but her courage stood steady. The manager narrowed his eyes, his voice sharp. Emma, this isn't the time. But Emma's lips curved into a steady line, her words cutting through. It's past time. Gasps filled the room as her confidence rose. Each sentence felt like breaking chains, her silence peeling away with every word. The colleague who once stole from her shifted in his seat, his smirk gone. David leaned forward, expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with approval. Emma thought, I'm not invisible anymore. For the first time, she did not tremble before power. She carried her own. Her voice grew stronger with each breath, flowing like a river long dammed. She outlined her work, her evidence undeniable, her passion unshakable. The team's chatter fell to silence, their eyes tracing her every gesture. Emma said, I built this, and I will no longer be erased. Her words echoed, heavy and true. For once, the silence in the room belonged to them, not her. The power she once feared now trembled at her feet. She thought, this is who I was always meant to be. The manager finally spoke, his tone measured but stiff. You've made your point. But Emma did not flinch. No, she said, her voice unwavering. I've only just begun. Her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, the air tense with shift. David leaned back, a slow grin tugging at his lips. Emma thought, this is no longer about permission, it's about claiming space. For the first time, she felt larger than the walls, larger than the fear that bound her. The meeting ended, not with applause but with silence heavy as thunder. Emma walked out first, her steps steady, her pulse still wild but alive. She thought, I did it. I finally spoke. The hall felt brighter, her breath deeper, the world lighter under her stride. David passed by muttering, took you long enough. She laughed softly, not in mockery, but in release. For the first time, her silence had ended on her own terms, and her voice had become her shield. That evening, Emma returned home, city lights shimmering through her window. She pressed her palms to the glass, her reflection steadier than ever before. She whispered, I am no longer erased. The silence in the room felt different, not suffocating, but sacred. Her voice echoed faintly in her mind, carrying the weight of truth. Emma thought, this silence belongs to me now. She spread her papers across the table again, but this time not to mourn them. Each page felt alive, her handwriting fierce and undeniable. She thought, this is proof that I exist and that I matter. No voice could erase her again. The silence was no longer her cage, but her stage. The next morning, Emma walked through the city streets alive with noise, but the noise no longer drowned her. She thought, my voice is part of this. She breathed deeply, shoulders straight, blending with the rhythm of the crowd. The silence inside her was no longer fear, it was strength, a well she could draw from. At work, she spoke with steady confidence, her words no longer hesitant. Some resisted, others listened, but all heard her. She thought, I don't need their permission to exist. Her silence had transformed into choice, her voice into command. The world had shifted, not because it allowed her, but because she claimed it. That night, Emma stood on her balcony, the city lights stretching infinite. She whispered, strength was never in silence, it was in breaking it. The words lingered in the air like a vow. The night embraced her, not as a shadow but as a presence. For the first time her story felt complete, her voice ringing eternal within her.